Right now, as you are watching this video, something may be happening inside your body that you cannot feel, cannot see, and have almost certainly never been warned about in the way I am about to warn you. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with sharp pain or sudden collapse. It moves slowly, quietly, like a current running just beneath the surface of everything, beneath your fatigue, beneath your joint stiffness, beneath the brain fog you have learned to accept as normal, beneath the weight that will not move no matter what you do, beneath the sleep that leaves you exhausted even after 8 hours. And the most frightening thing about it is not what it feels like. It is how long it can go on before anyone connects the dots. My name is Dr. William Lee, and I have spent decades studying how the body's internal defense systems either protect us or fail us, and what determines which direction they go. My research through the Angiogenesis Foundation and the work behind my book, Eat to Beat Disease, has brought me face to face with a biological reality that the mainstream medical system is extraordinarily slow to address directly with patients. That reality is this: chronic systemic inflammation is operating silently in the bodies of the majority of adults over 60, and it is the single most important driver of nearly every condition that robs people of their vitality, their sharpness, their independence, and ultimately their years. Today, I am going to walk you through the warning signs, the ones your body is almost certainly already sending you, the ones that are so easy to dismiss as normal aging that millions of people do exactly that every single day until the damage has gone somewhere that is much harder to reverse. I need you to stay with me through this entire video because the signs I'm going to share build on each other in a way that I think is going to feel uncomfortably recognizable to many of you. And I am saving the most important and least discussed warning sign for the very end, something that I have almost never seen addressed in popular health media, something that research now suggests may be the earliest and most telling indicator that chronic inflammation has taken hold in your biology. You do not want to miss it. But first, I want to ask you to do something right now before we go any further. Drop your age in the comments below and tell me the one symptom from your daily life that you have been told is just part of getting older. Because I have a feeling that by the time we finish today, you are going to see that symptom very differently. Let me begin with a story. Her name is Patricia, and she was 68 years old when she sat across from me and said something that has stayed with me ever since. She said, "Dr. Lee, I feel like I am disappearing." She did not mean it dramatically. She meant it literally, that the woman she had been for most of her life, the woman who had energy and clarity and strength and presence, was fading in increments she could not stop or explain. She was sleeping 8 to 9 hours and waking up tired. Her fingers were stiff every morning for the first hour of her day. She had gained weight around her midsection steadily for 5 years, despite not eating more than she ever had. She was forgetting words in the middle of sentences. She had developed what she described as a constant low-level sadness that had no specific cause, not depression exactly, but a heaviness that never quite lifted. She had seen 4 doctors in 3 years. Every blood panel had come back within normal range. Every physician had told her that what she was experiencing was consistent with normal aging. Patricia had started to believe them, what none of those physicians had looked for, what none had tested, none had discussed, none had even raised as a possibility, was the one thing that connected every single one of her symptoms. Patricia's body was profoundly, chronically inflamed. So let us talk about what that actually means, because the word inflammation gets used so casually that it has almost lost its power to alarm people, and I want to restore that power with precise biological language. Inflammation in its acute form is one of the most extraordinary things your body does. When you cut your finger, when you catch a virus, when you twist an ankle, your immune system launches an immediate, targeted, brilliantly orchestrated inflammatory response, flooding the injured area with immune cells, increasing blood flow, releasing chemical signals called cytokines that coordinate repair. Within days, the response resolves. The tissue heals, the inflammation recedes. This is acute inflammation, and it is a biological marvel. Chronic systemic inflammation is something entirely different. It is what happens when that same immune alarm system never fully switches off, when it continues to fire at a low, persistent level, not because there is an acute injury to heal, but because the body has been pushed into a state of ongoing immune activation by dietary inputs, environmental stressors, gut dysfunction, oxidative damage, and hormonal shifts that are extraordinarily common in adults over 60. The cytokines that are so protective in acute inflammation become destructive when they circulate chronically. They damage arterial walls, they cross the blood brain barrier and trigger neuroinflammation, they accelerate the breakdown of cartilage, they disrupt insulin signaling, they interfere with the cellular repair processes that my research on the body's regenerative systems has shown are absolutely essential for healthy aging. Chronic inflammation does not feel like a fire. It feels like a slow, steady leak, barely noticeable on any given day, catastrophic across years and decades. The first warning sign I want you to pay attention to is morning stiffness that takes more than 30 minutes to resolve. I do not mean the brief, expected tightness of muscles that have been still overnight. I mean a stiffness in your joints, your fingers, your knees, your hips, your lower back, that persists long enough that you have built a routine around it, that you know not to try to open jars or go downstairs too quickly until a certain amount of time has passed. Many people interpret this as the inevitable price of age, and their doctors often reinforce that interpretation. But the biological reality is more specific. Prolonged morning joint stiffness is a hallmark of synovial inflammation, inflammation of the fluid-filled membranes surrounding your joints. During sleep, joint fluid becomes less active, and inflammatory cytokines that have accumulated in the joint space are not being cleared. In a healthy, non-inflamed joint, this creates minimal stiffness that resolves quickly. In a chronically inflamed joint, those cytokine levels are elevated before sleep even begins, and the overnight accumulation creates a stiffness that the body takes significantly longer to metabolize and clear. If you are waking up stiff in multiple joints and that stiffness is lasting more than 20 or 30 minutes on a regular basis, your body is showing you in the most tangible physical way it can that systemic inflammation has moved into your joint tissue. The second warning sign is fatigue that sleep does not fix. And I want to be very precise here because this is one of the most commonly dismissed symptoms in older adults and one of the most diagnostically significant. I am not talking about tiredness that follows exertion or a night of disrupted sleep. I am talking about a fatigue that is present upon waking, that persists through the day regardless of rest, that feels cellular rather than muscular, a heaviness, a dimming, a sense that your body is running on a fraction of its available power. The biological mechanism here is extraordinarily well documented and deeply underappreciated in clinical practice. Chronic inflammation elevates circulating levels of specific cytokines, particularly interleukin 6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha I, that directly interfere with mitochondrial function. Your mitochondria are the energy producing organelles inside virtually every cell in your body. They convert the nutrients you consume into ATP, the molecular currency of cellular energy. When cytokine signaling disrupts mitochondrial efficiency, your cells are producing less energy even when provided with adequate nutritional substrate. This is not fatigue that a better night's sleep can solve, because the problem is not at the level of rest, it is at the level of cellular energy production. People experiencing this kind of inflammatory fatigue often describe it as profoundly different from ordinary tiredness. They say it feels like being unplugged, like moving through water. If that description resonates with you, I want you to take it seriously in a way that your previous medical appointments may not have encouraged. The third warning sign is cognitive symptoms, and specifically the constellation that researchers now sometimes call brain fog, which includes difficulty finding words, trouble holding a train of thought, a sense that mental processing has slowed, and a kind of haziness that makes concentration feel effortful in a way it never used to. My research and the broader neuroscience literature are increasingly united on a concept called neuroinflammation, inflammation that crosses the blood-brain barrier and activates the brain's resident immune cells, called microglia. In their healthy homeostatic state, microglia perform essential maintenance functions, clearing cellular debris, supporting synaptic health, protecting neural tissue. But when systemic inflammation is chronically elevated, microglia become overactivated. They begin releasing their own inflammatory signals inside the brain. They interfere with the pruning and maintenance of synaptic connections. They impair the signaling pathways involved in memory consolidation and retrieval. Multiple landmark studies have now linked elevated systemic inflammatory markers, particularly C reactive protein and interleukin 6, to accelerated cognitive decline and increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. When someone over 60 tells me their mind does not feel as sharp as it used to, I do not hear an inevitable feature of aging. I hear a possible neuroinflammatory signal that deserves investigation, not dismissal. Now, I want to tell you about a man named Thomas. He was 71 years old, a retired engineer, someone who had spent his career thinking precisely, solving complex problems, holding intricate systems in his mind simultaneously. He came to me because that precision was slipping. He was losing words in meetings with his former colleagues. He was reading the same paragraph multiple times without retaining it. He was making small errors of judgment and calculation that would have been impossible for him 5 years earlier. He told me with a kind of quiet devastation that I will never forget, afraid. His neurologist had found nothing structurally abnormal. His cognitive tests were technically within normal range. He was told to keep his mind active and come back in a year. What Thomas's medical team had not examined was his inflammatory biology. When I ran a comprehensive inflammatory panel on Thomas, looking at C reactive protein, interleukin 6, homocysteine, oxidative stress markers, the picture that emerged was not subtle. His body was operating in a state of significant chronic inflammatory activation. Over the course of 8 months, with targeted nutritional interventions, specific anti-inflammatory food compounds, including the polyphenol-rich foods my research has consistently highlighted, and the removal of several dietary drivers of inflammation from his daily intake, Thomas's cognitive symptoms shifted in ways he described as the difference between seeing through fog and seeing through clear glass. He started writing again. He took on a consulting project. He called me 3 months after our last appointment to say that he had felt, for the first time in years, like himself. That is not a coincidence. That is the biology of neuroinflammation responding to the right conditions. And now, before I share the remaining warning signs, including the number one most revealing and least discussed sign of chronic inflammation that I have been building toward, I want to pause and ask you something. If what I am sharing is landing for you, if you are hearing these symptoms and recognizing yourself in them, then please take 1 second right now and click the like button on this video. It is a small act that carries real consequence because it tells this platform that content grounded in real science and real compassion deserves to reach every person over 60 who is searching for answers they have not been able to find in a standard medical appointment. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please do that right now and hit the notification bell, because every week we publish content specifically designed to address the health realities of your season of life, backed by the same quality of research that goes into peer-reviewed publications, delivered in a way that is actually useful to you at home. Stay with me for the rest of this video, because what I am about to share in the final section has the potential to reframe everything you think you understand about what your body has been trying to tell you. The fourth warning sign is unexplained weight gain, and specifically weight that accumulates around the abdomen, that resists dietary restriction and exercise, and that seems to have taken up permanent residence in your midsection in a way that feels biochemically different from weight you have managed before. The mechanism here involves a vicious cycle that inflammation initiates and then perpetuates. Adipose tissue, body fat, particularly visceral fat stored around the organs of the abdomen, is not metabolically inert. It is an active endocrine organ that produces its own cytokines called adipokines, including leptin and resistin. As visceral fat accumulates, it increases the production of inflammatory adipokines. Those adipokines drive further systemic inflammation. That inflammation disrupts insulin signaling, making it harder for cells to respond to insulin effectively, which means blood glucose stays elevated longer after meals, more is converted to fat, and fat burning is biochemically suppressed. The inflammation also disrupts leptin signaling. Leptin being the hormone that tells your brain you are full and that your energy stores are adequate. When leptin signaling is disrupted by inflammation, the brain receives an inaccurate message that energy stores are depleted, driving increased appetite and reduced metabolic rate simultaneously. For someone over 60 who has been told to eat less and move more and cannot understand why those instructions are not producing results, The answer is almost always rooted in this inflammatory metabolic disruption rather than any lack of willpower or effort. The fifth warning sign is skin changes. And I want to be very specific because I am not talking about the normal textural changes that come with age. I am talking about persistent facial redness that has no obvious environmental trigger, about skin that flushes easily and stays flushed, about conditions like rosacea, eczema, or psoriasis that have emerged or worsened after 60, about a general dullness or grayness to the complexion that was not there before. The skin is the largest organ of the body, and it is also one of the most transparent windows into what is happening internally. The same inflammatory cytokines that drive joint damage, mitochondrial disruption, and neuroinflammation also activate inflammatory pathways in skin tissue. They increase the production of matrix metalloproteinases, enzymes that break down collagen and elastin. They disrupt the skin's barrier function. They drive the visible changes that many people attribute entirely to sun damage or genetics, when the underlying driver is systemic inflammatory biology. My research on angiogenesis, the growth and regulation of blood vessels, is directly relevant here because chronic inflammation drives disordered angiogenesis in skin tissue, contributing to the persistent facial redness and visible capillary changes that many inflamed patients present with. When I see a patient whose skin has changed significantly in quality, tone, or reactivity over the past several years, I see an organ showing me what is happening throughout the body. The sixth warning sign is digestive irregularity, and specifically, the cluster of symptoms that includes bloating, inconsistent bowel habits, a sense of heaviness or discomfort after eating, food sensitivities that have developed or worsened after 60, and the feeling that your digestive system is simply not working the way it once did. The gut is not peripheral to the question of systemic inflammation, it is central to it. The gut lining, when healthy, is an extraordinarily selective barrier. It allows nutrients to pass into the bloodstream while preventing bacterial products, undigested proteins, and environmental toxins from crossing over. But when the gut microbiome is disrupted by antibiotic use, processed food consumption, chronic stress, or the natural microbiome shifts that occur with aging, the integrity of that barrier is compromised. Bacterial products called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, begin to cross the gut wall and enter the bloodstream. LPS is one of the most potent activators of systemic inflammation known to science. Even at low concentrations, it triggers a significant inflammatory response. Researchers have documented elevated blood levels of LPS, a condition sometimes called metabolic endotoxemia, in patients with obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and neurodegenerative conditions, all of which are conditions driven significantly by chronic inflammation. The gut, in other words, is not just showing you that it is uncomfortable. It is showing you that the firewall protecting your entire body from chronic inflammatory activation may be compromised. Let me tell you about Dorothy. She was 66 years old and had been suffering from what she described as a life half lived for 4 years when she came to me. She bloated every single day, regardless of what she ate. She had developed sensitivities to food she had eaten her whole life without issue. Her skin, once a source of pride, had become reactive and dull. She had gained nearly 20 pounds without a meaningful change in her diet. She was exhausted every day by early afternoon. She was forgetting names and words in ways that embarrassed her socially, and she had begun avoiding social situations to protect herself from that embarrassment. She had been to a gastroenterologist, a dermatologist, and an endocrinologist. She had been given medications for each of her symptoms, treated in isolation. Not one physician had drawn a line connecting them. When Dorothy and I began working through her inflammatory biology comprehensively, addressing her gut microbiome with fermented foods and prebiotic fiber, removing the specific dietary inputs driving her LPS burden, adding targeted anti-inflammatory food compounds from the research I have published on the role of polyphenols in gut barrier function, her symptoms began to resolve in an order that told a biological story. Her digestion improved first. Then, within weeks of her digestion improving, her energy began to lift. Then her skin changed. Then her weight began to move for the first time in years. Then, last and most movingly, her mind began to clear. Dorothy sent me a photograph 6 months after we began working together. She was at her granddaughter's birthday party, laughing with her head thrown back, her skin glowing, present in a way she told me she had not been able to be for years. She said she had forgotten what it felt like to be fully in a room. That photograph is still on my desk, and now the warning sign I promised you, the one that research increasingly identifies as among the earliest and most revealing indicators of chronic systemic inflammation, and the one that is almost never discussed in popular health media. It is disrupted sleep architecture, not simply difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, but a specific pattern of sleep disruption in which a person may be getting adequate total hours, but waking consistently in the early hours of the morning between 3 and 5 a.m. with a mind that is immediately and uncomfortably alert. This pattern, sometimes called early morning awakening, has been identified in the sleep research literature as a distinct inflammatory signature. Here is the mechanism, and I want you to hold it because it is extraordinary. Inflammatory cytokines, particularly interleukin 1 beta and interleukin 6, are known to directly modulate sleep architecture by interfering with the cycling of slow wave deep sleep and REM sleep. They promote lighter sleep stages and increase the frequency of microarousals and full awakenings, particularly in the early morning hours when the body's natural cortisol begins to rise. People with chronically elevated inflammatory markers spend less time in the deep restorative sleep stages where the glymphatic system, the brain's lymphatic waste clearance mechanism, does its most critical work, flushing out the metabolic byproducts, including the amyloid beta proteins associated with Alzheimer's risk. In other words, inflammatory disruption of sleep not only leaves you exhausted, it directly impairs the brain's nightly self-cleaning process, creating a compounding cycle in which inflammation disrupts the very mechanism that, if allowed to function, would help clear some of the inflammatory damage from neural tissue. If you are waking between 3 and 5 a.m. consistently, lying awake with a mind that will not quiet, and this has been your pattern for months or years, your body may be showing you the earliest biological signature of a chronic inflammatory state that has been operating long before the other. More obvious symptoms became undeniable. This is not something to accept. This is something to investigate, to address, and to reverse. And the same science that identified this mechanism has also documented that reducing systemic inflammation through targeted nutritional interventions produces measurable improvements in sleep architecture within weeks. Here's what I want to leave you with, and I am speaking now not only as a researcher, but as someone who has watched thousands of people arrive at these doors believing the story they had been told, that what they were experiencing was simply age, simply time, simply the inevitable surrender that everyone eventually makes. I have watched them discover that that story was incomplete. I have watched their biology respond to change in ways that moved them to tears. I have watched men and women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s reclaim capabilities, vitality, and joy that they had quietly grieved as lost forever. And I need you to hear this with absolute clarity. The science does not support the narrative of inevitable decline. The science supports something far more hopeful and far more demanding. Demanding because it requires you to take what I have shared today seriously, to look at your symptoms not as the acceptable cost of aging, but as signals from a body that is asking for something different. You woke up this morning carrying information in your body, in your joints, in your energy, in your sleep, in your skin, in your digestion, in the clarity of your mind that has been trying to tell you something. Today, you have been given the language to understand what it has been saying. That is not a small thing. That is the beginning of something real. Leave a comment right now. Tell me your age. Tell me which warning sign landed hardest for you. Tell me what you have been dismissing as normal that you are no longer willing to accept. Share this video with someone you love who needs to hear this. And know, with the full weight of the science and the thousands of lives I've been privileged to witness transform, that you are not too old, not too far along, not past the point where change is possible. You are exactly where you need to be. Your body is still listening, and it is waiting for you to listen back.